we'll open that back up again, but only if we're running ahead of schedule. So with that, we'll move on to the superintendent's update. So I'll turn it over to you, Mike.
Sure. This is one of the lengthier ones since we haven't met in a couple months. So please know I'm just doing the highlights because I know we have a lot of weighty topics to get to. But I do want to talk about some of the summer highlights for us. I'll go department by department. The Family Center provided administrative oversight of our Achievement Academy, which supported 90 students, and the Bellis, I'll only talk about Amherst thing. So 90 students who were able to attend a 4-week summer program that was housed at Crocker Farm. They created a teaching assistant positions, which is new for high school students to support the Achievement Academy, which trained and hired 6 students. So it was really nice that students who were graduates of our elementary schools were able to go back and be paid and be able to do great work with our elementary kids. And our backpack project was highly successful, and there was over 500 backpacks that were given out to students each year. So great job by them. Business office, less flashy perhaps, but they closed the fiscal year and started the next fiscal year. A lot of end of the year, kind of that transition between the fiscal years is quite a challenge, and they did it with plum. And we also do a lot of hiring, so they're involved with working with HR about pay scales and making sure our staff start where they're supposed to start. Our curriculum office provided training on the new math curriculum for elementary administrators over the summer, as well as organized the training for all teachers on one of the pre-service days. Also worked to select new elementary literacy benchmark screeners because the state changed their regs again, or guidance again on that. So that was another project. And something we'll talk about tonight is work to develop the initial plan for the move of 6th grade to the middle school. Our ELL and dual language provided oversight of a high school ELL institute, which served 25 of our students, again, with high school students in charge. You'll notice a theme here about making some connections from elementary and secondary students. Also, the Commandante summer program served over 100 students this summer, so greatly expanded program at the high school site just because of our space needs. Crocker was very full and really made it work with a morning that was more academically focused and an afternoon that was purely enrichment focused with what typically you think of specials, but really filling the whole afternoon. So greatly enjoyed by our families and students, all free of charge. Our facilities department, again, I could go on and on, but at Fort River, reinforced some damaged walls, built wall-to-block corner of the library, took down a partition wall in the former computer lab as we continue to retrofit rooms the next couple of years, and installed some portable walls in one of the quads to provide more acoustic privacy in some of the spaces. So lots of work over at Fort. Sounds like it'll take me a little while to get to it, but at the middle school, there was a 15,000-gallon underground heating oil tank removed, but 10,000 of those gallons were tested, that was in there, tested, and they were viable, and so transferred over to Wildwood and Crocker Farm that still use oil heat. Fort River's on gas. So we are, recycling's kind of an awkward word for it, but I believe it's probably the best one I can come up with. So the elementary schools benefit, especially given the price of gas. And it's between the districts. There is a financial piece, but a lot better than buying on the open market at the moment. Wildwood removed. We've been doing this as I think the 5th year we've been removing the wall-to-wall carpet that's original to the building. So this summer was 10,000 square feet in quads E and F. So at this point, we have fully removed the carpet from the quads, which is a great, it's wonderful for indoor air quality and health, and just also looks much nicer, to be blunt, and also the teacher workspace, and put in vinyl tile. And at all schools, tested and repaired what's called Columbine lock, so just makes it more safe and secure. They deep cleaned all the school buildings, which has a square footage, the elementary level of over 300,000 square feet, and over 30 classrooms K-12 were moved from one to the other. In other words, used to be a 5th grade classroom, now it's a 3rd grade classroom, and we moved the teachers things for them. So that was a lot of the work, and we've applied for 2 electric bus grant programs. I think it's important to note that if we received those grants, either of those grants, it would still require significant outlay for the town. In other words, we are not a priority district where it funds the whole project, but it would fund a significant portion of it, and I think be a very worthwhile conversation for this district as well as for the town of Amherst. Food service between meal service for our summer programs, as well as in the community, served over 15,000 meals free of charge to students in our community. There's a site located at Crocker Farm that was located, and the middle school, but both of those were open to all children, doesn't matter what age they were in the community. Our health department hosted a COVID vaccine clinic on August 10th, which provided vaccines to 67 individuals, a lot of students and their families. Human resources, lots of hiring. One of the things we're proud of is that we've hired 10 folks who were formerly working as paraeducators in the district, who are now in teacher roles, unit A roles. We've had a long-term grow your own program, and this has been the most successful year with it. And we provided de-escalation training and classroom management for those folks, so that as they're making that transition, they have that. We're providing them with the skills to be successful in their new role. Student Services provided oversight for multiple summer programs, the special ed summer program serving 60 students for 4 weeks, and the 15 students in the ILC and the preschool that were served for 6 weeks over the summer. Again, I go on and on, so I'm going to stop, but I will also note a couple of things. First night was a huge success, much beyond my expectations. I was really, I think I voiced my disappointment at moving to Kendrick Park, and it actually ended up being lovely, and I was wrong. Many families indicated they really enjoyed it more. It's a longer, thinner site, which allowed for a more diverse array of activities, and the playground obviously was a big hit, because most of the students there were elementary age. We brought 300 pieces of ice cream, and they all went to kids, and we didn't do doubles, so we had more than 300 elementary age kids there. But we gave it hundreds and hundreds of books that we had from Reader to Reader. We had great support, fire trucks. Our facilities department both gave out the ice cream, but also allowed for students to, get on a school bus, which for some students was a pretty exciting opportunity, particularly students who are new to the district. We had our principals there. So I'm happily wrong. We've gotten lots of requests to maintain it at Kendrick Park, which was not what I expected to have, but it was great. We started school, and we had a successful start of school year, right? Maybe a topic to come back to later, not in this agenda, but in a future agenda, is around safety. So we did have a shelter in place based on the reported incident at Amherst College on the second day of school. So everyone practiced their drills without students on the Wednesday, and then we had a more active live, wasn't quite a drill, but experience on Friday. So we got a lot of feedback, actually some benefits of that from teachers and kids, that they got acclimated, and sometimes the longer you go without doing it, we haven't done as many drills. And so we've communicated a lot with Amherst College since then. We have a meeting scheduled, I think, next week with the town and Amherst College to increase the communication and some of the protocols between the college and ourselves. First day of kindergarten preschool was yesterday. It was lovely. I went over to Crocker Farm, because there we get, the kindergarten start everywhere, but Crocker Farm, you get the double dip of, new preschoolers and the new kindergartners. We worked with a local chalk artist who did a lovely chalk drawing on the wall in the preschool playground, and it was a huge hit with students and families taking pictures at the beginning of their preschool school year. And we saw some kindergarten families moseying over as they saw the action over there. But that worked really well, and just thanks to the staff, with our younger students in particular, right? There's a lot of emotions for kids, and there's a lot of emotions for their families, and they really handled it well, and very successful start. I also want to note and thank the facilities department. Buses, last year, if you remember, we had a more rocky start, and this year, much smoother start. A little bit Shutesbury and Leverett runs today at another district. As they started today, we gets a little more complicated for our transportation folks, but we've been much more on time at stops and on time in school, without kids feeling they need to rush in because they're late. So thank you for them. That 2 things ahead of us. We have on the 23rd of September, we will have our annual Puerto Rican Day celebration. We'll do that in front of Town Hall again. We're still working on all the details, but we know it's 10 o'clock. We know it's on the 23rd in front of Town Hall. Those of you who went in the past, it's a wonderful event, open to the public, and encourage committee members, if they're able to go, to go. And I think I'll stop there, because that was a pretty lengthy update, but I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have. I promise they won't all be this long in the future.
Many months to go through. Questions? Peter.
Yeah, thank you so much for highlighting all those programs over the summer. It really emphasizes how our public schools have become a 365 community service. I mean, with the COVID vaccines and the backpack program and the meal program and everything we do, it's not just a little bit of a summer school program and pack up the tent. So it's really great to hear. The project backpack with 500 backpacks given out, that's tremendous. And I'm just wondering about how that's funded, and are we confident that that's meeting the need? Does it need to be funded at a higher level? Is the funding sustainable? And then shorter question, you mentioned Columbine locks. If you could just define that and why we do that and what the benefit is.
So on the first one, those are donations. So and the Family Center is wonderful at getting community organizations who want to be a part of supporting students. We did have more than 500 backpacks present, so we gave the extras to the schools to distribute to kids who came the first day or two without a backpack or in need of one. So we've actually given out more, really just referring to 2 days where there's pickup. This year they were really colorful, which was nice, and I think that was the more attractive they are, the more families, and kids get excited about it. So at this point, we have community organizations who donate to us, and I'm happy to get a little more information on that if that's helpful. Kanban locks, and someone on this call might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially they are focused on being able to lock the door from the inside. So like when I was teaching at Fort River, if I wanted to lock the door, I had to open the door, lock from the outside, and then close the door, which, from a safety security model, and that was the way doors were, right? It wasn't like we were any different from anyone else. And they're called Columbine lines because after the tragedy in Columbine, lots of people said, we have to think of a different model, right? This is not one that's keeping people safe. So we've been changing the locks is not as simple as it sounds or inexpensive as it might sound. So we've been over the process of quite a while, been updating the locks throughout the school, and then some locks wear out, right? So the idea is that our person, James, who does locks for the district, goes around over the summer where it's a little easier and identifies if there are problematic locks and swaps them out. Checking with Ben if I did that right, because he's more knowledgeable than me.
The only thing I would add is the difference between like a Columbine lock and your typical like interior locked door is there's not a push button. So if you had younger kids, like it's a keyed lock, right? So that way you don't have to worry about it accidentally becoming unlocked. But yeah, everything else was spot on.
Thank you, Ben.
Irv.
Just wanted to make sure that we mentioned in terms of those backpacks that the majority of them, it's hundreds of them, were donated by the Rotary Club of Amherst.
Thank you. I had a question on the electric bus. And I appreciate you went through a lot really quickly. So that's awesome. And it meant that I'm like scribbling and I'm like, wait, what did you say? So I apologize if you already said this and I'm just asking you to restate it.
No.
Which is, so I think I heard you say that we applied for the grant for electric buses, but then there's a decision that has to be made. Can you describe just a little bit more about what that is? You're muted, Mike.
Amherst Media is still messaging me. We're still trying to work on that, so I apologize for being distracted a bit. There's two grant funding programs that supplement. They provide financial support for districts who are awarded the grant around the purchase of an electric bus. For priority districts, which are generally districts with a higher poverty rate than what we have, they would fund the whole kit and caboodle, right? All parts of it. And we did not qualify as a priority district. So as such, if we were to receive a grant, it would not cover the full cost of the electric bus and charging station that would be needed. So I think if we do get a grant, we'd have to have a conversation about with, both, my opinion, it would be with the full committee, and then bringing that to JCPC about the delta between the actual real cost of that, and then also the and then what the grant covers. So there's going to be a delta. It's not a small delta. It's not a, these are just expensive. And right now, I think it's worth noting that like many supply chain challenged areas, this is no different than other areas where the proximity of making an order and then it coming isn't as small as it used to be. That's true on traditional buses as well. It's not specific to electric buses. We're having that challenge now with the bus that was purchased a while ago, and when is it going to come? So that's the distinction that I want to cut, as opposed to the grant that we had 6 years ago, 7 years ago, where we did get an electric bus that really did cover not so much the maintenance cost, but the cost of the bus, cost of the charging station. These grants would cover, I'm hesitating to give a fixed number because I don't know what the cost of electric bus will be or exactly what grant we'll get. But my sense is they cover the majority of the cost, but certainly not, I wouldn't use the word vast majority, or I wouldn't, it defrays the cost quite a bit. It makes it much more comparable to buying a non-electric bus, but it would be a decision that this committee and then JCPC and the town would have to make. And perhaps depending when we receive the information about whether we get the grant or not, it might be out of order in terms of capital. So that's the other thing that's worth knowing is if we get it, we have to make a decision in some relatively quick order about are we going through it, and it may not fit within the typical capital cycle. They won't tell us exactly when we'll know, but they're not working on our schedule. It's kind of the other way around. Does that give you what you needed? I'm sorry, I wasn't more clear on the front end of that.
Oh, no, that's fine. Yeah, I think a discussion and when it gets to that point, because I recall when we've talked about this in prior years on the committee, we had conversation that in fact in terms of an emissions perspective, that encouraging and incentivizing more people to actually ride the bus as opposed to drive individual cars to our schools would have a greater impact on sort of overall emissions in our town. So it'd be interesting to sort of circle back to that conversation and include that, I think, when we do get to the point that we're talking about the expense of an electric bus.
Yeah, I agree. And then also there's some other complications with it as well. So, in terms of, there's another district that may want to weigh in on that question of distance to schools. I think it's worth two things. One, there's more students, anecdotal data, but my principals are reporting that more students are taking the bus this fall than were taking the bus last year. Now, I don't think that's necessarily about, I don't know the reasons, but I wouldn't jump to the conclusion that it's specifically because of the green piece, but it is having a positive impact on both the logistics and operations of the morning as well as the green aspects. And secondly, Amherst Media let me know that they are having some live streaming issues to cable, but this is now streaming live to YouTube, their YouTube channel. So people who want to watch and not be on the call, I mean, you're welcome to be on the call, as we do have members of the public here, but if they want to watch it without having a box on it, their YouTube channel is streaming live.
Thank you. Any more questions for Mike? Seeing none, we'll move to a chair's update, and I just have, I think, a brief update. So another committee that we all serve on has not met, but the negotiating subcommittee of that committee is going to be meeting on September 12th. And that is a bargaining session, not a bargaining session, that is a meeting with the mediator, the state mediator. So folks will recall that the regional school committee sought mediation at the end of last summer, the end of last June. So that first meeting with the mediator is scheduled for September 12th. And I do want to address a fact, because I think there was some discussion in the community about this, and just to sort of bring this forward again, our superintendent, our districts are actually three separate districts that are sort of convened together in one sort of employer unit. but we have 3 distinct governing bodies for each of the districts: Pelham, Amherst, and the region. The Pelham and the Amherst school committees delegate and authorize the regional school committee to negotiate with contracts on our behalf with the bargaining units of the staff in those 3 districts. So as such, and because the Amherst School Committee is 5 members, which constitutes a quorum of another school committee, we are actually not able to talk about subjects and topics that are part of the purview, if you will, or the responsibility of the regional school committee. The exception would be is if we called to order a meeting of the regional school committee, and we haven't done that because we didn't post it. So I think these are sort of wonky legal things that sort of are difficult to track and understand and feel like they're burdensome, and they can be in many cases. But the goal is transparency, and our colleagues from the other member towns of the region school district are not part of this committee, and therefore we're not talking about topics that are the business of that regional school committee. So as I mentioned, negotiations, whether mediation, bargaining, are the purview of that committee, and will be. I haven't seen the agenda, but that committee and that group of individuals will be talking and sort of progressing that topic. So that is all I had from an update this evening. I'm going to move to school committee updates to look at school committee members if they have any updates. And actually, as I do that, I will note that the budget coordinating group is going to be meeting. That meeting was called for, and I'm going to look to Peter to remind me of that date. It's later in September. Is it the 23rd?
Don't know off the top of my head. I can check real quick.
All right. And so that meeting is being convened. And just for folks that are new to this, a budget coordinating group is a group convened by the town with the members, representatives from the town council, the library board of trustees, and the Amherst School Committee, typically to work through issues in case of budget challenges and reductions, and to talk about sort of the needs of each of those bodies for their individual budgets. The purpose of this one is really going to be focused on having a conversation, I think looking at sort of the closing of the prior fiscal year, as well as a conversation about charter school accounting, which is a topic on our agenda this evening. Peter.
September 21st at 4:30 is the meeting of that body.
Thank you. Are there any other announcements or updates from school committee members? Peter.
Just a brief announcement that the first meeting of CPAC is this Friday morning. For those of you who don't know and are watching, CPAC is the Special Education Parent Advisory Council. There to talk about and work through issues with special education that affect families in the district and students. It's open to everybody. You do not have to have a student on an IEP to attend. Easiest way to link up with that meeting is just shoot a quick email to CPAC, SEPAC@arps.org, and they'll share you the link there. I think they're also on Facebook and whatnot. But a great resource to keep in mind, particularly if you have other parents that you know who are maybe wondering about how to navigate special education services. Maybe they're having some questions, they don't know where to go to. CPAC is an excellent resource that you can refer them to.
Thank you. So I noticed that another couple folks have joined us. And so as mentioned earlier, I'm going to reopen public comment because we are running just a couple minutes ahead of schedule. So invite anybody again to use the raise hand function if you would like to speak. Seeing none, we'll now close public comment and we'll move on to new and continuing business. And first up, This is sort of like the warrant report version of the superintendent update. So there's a lot. I've attached all of them in there. So I am going to do my duty and read all 13 of these warrant reports that have been signed since the end of June. So first, I, Allison McDonald, authorized by my signature payables in the amount of $173,268.92 for a warrant dated June 17th, 2022. This included general fund expenses of $133,760.89, revolving fund expenses of $18,499.06, grant fund expenses of $4,888.49, ESSER funds of $15,880.73, and miscellaneous of $239.75. And I signed that on June 29th. I, Allison McDonald, authorized by my signature payables in the amount of $204,095.08 for the warrant dated June 24th, 2022. This includes general fund expenses of $117,404.97, revolving fund expenses of $25,187.06, grant fund expenses of $40,552.92, ESSER funds of $19,550.13, and a gift of $1,395. Sorry, gifts. And I signed that on July 6th, 2022. I, Allison McDonald, authorized by my signature to payables in the amount of $128,111.13 for a warrant dated June 27th, 2022. This includes general fund expenses of $73,667.62, revolving fund expenses of $2,714.58, grant fund expenses of $49,408.21, ESSER funds of $429.63, and miscellaneous of $1,891.09. And I signed that on July 18th, 2022. I, Allison McDonald, authorized payroll in the amount of $783,719.01, dated July 13th, 2022, and I signed that on July 18th, 2022. I, Allison McDonald, authorized payroll in the amount of $692,182.33, dated July 27th, 2022, and I signed that on August 2nd, 2022. I, Allison McDonald, authorized by my signature to payables in the amount of $95,540.27 for a warrant dated June 29th, 2022. This includes general fund expenses of $91,131.58, grant fund expenses of $4,408.69, and I signed that on August 2nd, 2022. I, Allison McDonald, authorized by my signature to payables in the amount of $69,871.23, missing a comma, dated for a warrant dated June 30th, 2022. This included general fund expenses of $25,429.20, revolving funds expenses of $34,932.07, grant fund expenses of $8,819.66, and ESSER funds of $690.30. And I signed that on August 2nd, 2022. I, Allison McDonald, authorized payroll in the amount of $675,095.74 dated August 10th, 2022, and I signed that on August 9th, 2022. I, Allison McDonald, authorized payroll in the amount of $31,734.71 dated August 24th, 2022, and I signed that on August 15th, 2022. I, Allison McDonald, authorized by my signature to payables in the amount of $698,208.75 for a warrant dated August 12th, 2022. This includes general fund expenses of $683,193.19, revolving fund expenses of $14,685.56, and grant funds expenses of $330. I signed that on August 16th, 2022. I, Allison McDonald, authorized by my signature to payables in the amount of $18,241.82 for a warrant dated August 19th, 2022. This includes general fund expenses of $75, grant fund expenses of $18,038.82, and ESSER funds of $128. And I signed that on August 19th, 2022. And, oh, no, two more. I, Allison McDonald, authorized payroll in the amount of $608,866.96 dated August 24th, 2022, and I signed that on August 23rd, 2022. And last but not least, I, Allison McDonald, authorized by my signature to payables in the amount of $155,852.14 for a warrant dated August 29th, 2022. This includes general fund expenses of $92,432.36, revolving fund expenses of $26,331.54, grant fund expenses of $33,697.04, and ESSER funds of $3,391.20. And I signed that on August 30th, 2022. And that should be all 13. With that, we'll move on to the next item, which is superintendent goals for fiscal year 23. And just as a reminder, I did attach to this the guidance that we looked at the end of last year. I think that was at our June 28th meeting. And also attached is the draft goals that Mike has drafted based on our guidance. So I will turn that over. Just as a recap, I think we had a couple of questions that we sort of didn't land on from last time. Which was the question about having multi-year goals. We didn't really land on a conclusion on that, and I know that that's an ongoing topic of conversation across multiple school committees that work with Mike. And then the other question, I think, was about metrics, and we talked a bit about sort of how we wanted to measure progress against these goals. So I'm just putting that out there as we talk about these goals, so that we have that in mind from last time. So,
Sure.
Mike?
Sure, thank you. These were attached. I think all the documents except for the MSBA one, which was new today, were attached last Friday. So they were all part of the packet. I'm not going to literally read them, but I tried to base these goals based on the document that you all produce, which, there's a lot of important things, as you noted in the document that you all discussed, that either were goals in the past or they're really important, but not necessarily going to be goals of the district this year. So I tried to align those very intentionally. The first word in this is draft goals. So I was trying to, again, develop ideas that you all could respond to and give me feedback on, so that I can come back next month with a more firm final list of goals for your all consideration. So, I'd love feedback, and, it certainly can happen tonight. But also, if you have additional feedback between now and our next meeting, I'm open to hearing it as well. But I don't have much more to say. Maybe I'll just go down them just for viewers who don't have access to the board docs for whatever reason. The first goal is really around the grade 6 transition to the middle school and trying to identify both outreach goals, but also confirm the plan and then confirm the staffing, and also equally importantly have students get to visit. The second goal, to ease the transition, the second goal was really around the school building committee, which this is a critical year for, as it's anticipated that there will be a town vote as well as an MSBA vote this year on that project. So we'll know in this academic year whether we're moving forward or not, and how we're moving forward as well. So the second goal was focused on that. The third goal was focused on the math curriculum, which you all considered and voted last year, and it's focused on the implementation of that. The fourth goal was consistent with kind of an interest in further engaging folks on the budget and the budget process. And the last goal was around DEI topics, both in terms of hiring, advancement growth, but also things that lead to retention of our staff of color, BIPOC staff. So in a nutshell, those were, I tried to align those goals to the feedback I received from the committee at our meeting in June. Their draft, I keep on saying that because I am interested in feedback from the committee. I want to make sure they're consistent with what you think are these draft goals are consistent with what you all think are the most important things to be working on this year. And I'll leave it there, open for any comments, questions, or feedback.
Thank you. I'll look to the committee now for questions or comments or thoughts on this. Irv.
Yeah, Mike, thank you a lot for this. I guess when I look at these goals, they're the ones that are really important for the advancement of the Amherst schools. I particularly was interested in number 4 in terms of supporting the Amherst School Committee's efforts in relationship to the budget. And I consider that to be a very, very important and central goal and objective for this school committee as we move forward. I've indicated in the past that I believe that there are going to be significant challenges coming up with the budget. And I think that there needs to be a robust public relations campaign in relationship to the budget as it relates to the public, and not only understanding the budget, but also knowing and understanding why the budget is the way it is, and also developing a support mechanism that allows us to reach out to our public and supporters. The upcoming years are going to be years in which we cannot be passive bystanders. We are going to have to be proactive.
Other questions? Peter.
Yeah. So thank you for putting this together. I think this is a great next step from where we started, from the principals. So I agree with every initiative here. I don't think it's a matter of disagreeing with any of these things. And to me, it's always a matter of, okay, structurally, what's going to be the most pragmatic way to articulate, the evaluation process and how we interface and relate school committee to superintendent. Because, like just jumping to number 5, support opportunities for advancement and growth for individuals of color within our organization. The expectation is that you do that all the time, and that's a priority every year. And I'm sure you would agree with that. And it sort of gets back to one of those bullet points that, is undefinable in our guiding principles, which is, things that are top priorities don't necessarily have to be articulated as a goal every year. And yet, we don't, there's also this human element I find I struggle with, but if you drop it off, then it feels like you're not prioritizing it. Anyway, so that's kind of one of the unsolvable problems. But I think the first 3, I think are pretty high on my priority list in terms of things that are specifically happening this year that are going to demand a level of your attention that in typical years would not. So like, I can't imagine, the culmination of the school building project and that not being one of your goals. That seems rather, that would be odd. And then same thing with the sixth grade in the middle school. I mean, obviously we have the votes with the building project coming up. In terms of magnitude of change this year and all the moving parts of that, and especially with wanting to proactively manage the feedback loop with students and staff and parents, I think that's super important. So that makes a lot of sense to me as the number one goal. And also that is feedback. By feedback meaning you take the input and that informs the next round of proposals or decisions in it, so that people feel like that it's that kind of response, and not just like input survey, we got a green light to do what we originally planned to do kind of thing. Number 4 is interesting. I mean, I agree with all the principles that Irv talked about, and it's obviously something we've tried to do a lot. I guess I would ask you to maybe go back and reflect a little bit on what you think concretely the superintendent's role would be in that, because at the end of the day, the school committee owns the budget. We approve the budget. We're the elected officials. It's our responsibility to advocate for it and to communicate it. And certainly we can use all the support we can get. And I absolutely welcome your involvement. I'm just trying to think about what would that look? What would success for your participation in that look like? In terms of like what you are able to do for us. But otherwise, I think these are excellent point for where we're at right now.
Jennifer. You're muted.
Sorry. Okay. So let's see. For number 5, I agree that this is a super important goal, and of course, I don't disagree with anything in it. But I guess I would love to see some metrics attached to it. Like when you think about SMART goals, the S stands for specific, and it's a very feel-good goal, but it's not very specific. Like, how will we know if this goal has been achieved, or how will we know what the progress towards meeting this goal is? Because to recruit, hire, retain, and promote are 4 very different things, and we could be successful in some and not in others. Like, we could hire people of color but not retain. Or like our retention numbers could go down, but our hiring numbers could go up. Like, I would love to see some achievable, which is another part of SMART goals, some achievable metrics attached to this, so that we have something specific, so that Mike has something specific to shoot for, and so that we can know, so that it's clear, yes or no, was this goal achieved, or what was the progress towards achieving those goals?
Mike.
Yeah, thank you. I think you're spot on. The feedback, both yours, Jennifer, and Peter's, on goal 5. Doreen and I we worked on together. We're really struggling with that. It's also needs to be a multi-year goal because, to your point on metrics, like our hiring process I'm not going to be able to do something in June that shows you what it is, because our hiring process extends beyond there. So, I think, we're trying to respond to the document that you all, gave us or gave me. So I'll do some reconsideration of that, because I do think it's hard to measure. It's a multi-year goal unless we're really shifting to multi-year goals. It's going to be really hard at the end of the year. We could say, like, here's where we are, but we're still in the process of hiring. It's not going to, I have a concern, much like you, that it's not going to be measurable, achievable, and it's not going to feel great, right? Because it's something really important, and maybe we need to focus on another topic in DEI work, which we all believe in and is really important, that is more measurable, that is more, we can gather feedback over time about the impact. So, I just want to acknowledge and agree with this. This is something that, and I mentioned during, this goal in particular, worked on together, and her department / the district is doing an awful lot of work, but it's just because they're doing work, to Peter's point, doesn't mean that should be a goal, right? And so that's one that we'll go back and we'll reconsider and see what we can come up with that I think fits the SMART moniker more accurately than how it's currently drafted. So thank you for that feedback.
I had similar thoughts on both 4 and 5 also, but I think what I appreciate in goal number 5 is I sort of look at that first sentence really as sort of the vision, the end in mind, and what you're talking about, the work that's going to happen this year, and how you want us to how you're proposing that we evaluate you on that is, did you support opportunities for advancement and did you take actions? And I feel like those two things can be measurable, but it needs a little bit more specificity about how, how or what are the, how are you going to support, or what are those opportunities for advancement that you're, like describing those. And it could be like some of the earlier ones where it's, this kind of thing is going to happen by this date. It doesn't necessarily need to be sort of all the way to outcomes, because I agree that would be sort of in 2 years from now, we want to see, or 3 years from now, we want to see this movement in sort of the proportion of our staff that are BIPOC. But I do think that there's maybe some room to add a little bit more specificity on sort of what are those opportunities for advancement and what are sort of those actions. And it occurred to me also, that sense of belonging, which is kind of a, it's a lovely term, but how do you know whether you've done that? So we did do that. We have some insight, not on all staff, but some insight from the principals research that was done last year. And I wonder if that can inform something that is getting feedback sort of maybe middle of the year-ish, springtime, to sort of see how we're doing on that from school-wide basis. I'm just thinking out loud. I'm not suggesting that you add that, but I wonder if there's something that sort of can link in with some of the insights that we garnered from that that prior work that was done on that topic. And then same with the topic goal number 4. I had the similar thought with as Peter did, is thinking through what that might look like, and sort of similar to all of the other goals, sort of adding, a couple bullet points that says maybe something that you specifically or you and your team can be working on as evidence of support. And that's all I had. I thought that these were solid and connected really nicely with the guidance that we discussed last time. Any closing thoughts? Peter?
Yeah, so just real quick on the metrics and diversity. So I think it's been a good discussion to ponder over. I think maybe one thing is to maybe talk to Doreen about, what's, because she's been doing this right on the front lines for years now, and had a lot of success in it. What's a reasonable metric to target, right? And what are those metrics? Like, I guess, I want to make it meaningful enough that it's a motivator, right? That it focuses effort, and yet I don't want them to be unreasonable. I'd be like, double the diversity of our staff. It's like, well, you don't control every variable, obviously, in the macroeconomics and the recruitment pool and all that. So just to think about what those are. I mean, there's probably things that happen in the hiring process that I'm not even aware of just because I'm not in HR. I guess I didn't want to leave this discussion without briefly hitting on the 2-year eval question, because pretty soon, once we start to hone in on what these want these specifically to be, and we get articulated them in terms of their end state, we're going to have to decide, the fork in the road. Do we want these to be 1 or 2 year goals? My 2 cents, my feeling is that I like, generally speaking, the idea of a 2-year evaluation process at this stage, when we have a superintendent who's been here for a long time. He's gotten very good reviews. He's stable, and he's focusing on things that already have a multi-year view. I think that's kind of like what the 2-year eval is made for. That to me feels like a really good fit. As I thought about it this summer, though, I think there is a potential issue with how we start this off in terms of the timing with the Amherst School Committee election cycle. So, for example, and this gets a little into the weeds, so maybe this requires a visual, but real quick, if we started a 2-year cycle for now, meaning goals that began July 22 and that get evaluated in June 24, this cohort of elected school committee in calendar year 22 and 23 would serve through the end of next year, and then a new cohort of potentially 5 new members, maybe all the same members, but some in between, but some new cohort would start in 24, and then less than 6 months later would evaluate the superintendent on the previous 2 years. And so I think that's not ideal timing. My personal preference is that I like it better that, if we did this next year, then one of the last things this cohort would be doing would be defining the goals for the next 2 years. The next cohort comes on, lives and works with the superintendent for a year and a half, evaluates them on the previous 2 years, and then having had that experience, then is able to set the goals. I also think, that there's kind of a nice baton handoff transition there. We talk about one of the challenges of the Amherst School Committee election cycle is what if, losing the institutional knowledge. And so I kind of like that transition. But it's a bigger topic in and of itself, the 2-year evaluations, but I didn't want to leave this without at least bringing it up.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought us back to that, because I do think that it will take a lot more pondering, because I struggled with that same sense too. And I was also thinking, how unfair that might be for an incoming school committee if there's more than one new member in particular, that because they inherit goals that they had nothing to do with, and then are required to sort of supervise the implementation of that. And in theory, the Amherst School Committee is the Amherst School Committee. It's a single body, regardless of who the individual members are, right? We operate as a whole and as a unit, not as individuals. And then, so at the risk of sort of really opening the can of worms, it could be that it moves to a different calendar altogether, and it's from January to December, right? And a 2-year process, so that it does actually align with the Amherst sort of school committee term, right? So the new committee comes on, could talk about goals. It doesn't work with the school cycle. So there's drawbacks, I think, big downsides in either way. So that's why I was just sort of like, maybe this is, I think, a longer term that I think that we can't, that is difficult for us to just decide right now for this one. And so that's sort of where I landed and defaulted back to our usual 1 year, and sort of maybe consider throughout this year how we might do that, and sort of take the time to really think about that, as opposed to trying to figure and come to a conclusion now. Any other comments, thoughts, questions on the draft goals? Mike, do you feel like you have feedback to work on this again? Okay, great. So next up, and as a reminder, Mike did say that if any of us have additional feedback that we want to share in before the next meeting, please email him. Enrollment. So our next topic is enrollment and Commandantess update.
Yep, and Katie's here with us tonight. So thank you, Katie, for making the time. Busy time of year for everyone. And so really, we wanted to provide you, and I think this afternoon, there's some great questions from committee members. So we made sure everyone had the additional data points. Sorry for my formatting. Lack of capacity to solve formatting problems, I'll put it that way. But we wanted to provide you with the data you need. I think, as noted last spring, this is something that the committee was going to review on a regular basis. I think from my vantage point, I think the enrollment piece, we've made minor tweaks over the last couple of years, and I think it's functioning as desired, that we're continue to emphasize and promote having a diverse set of students. And by diverse, I'm explicitly referring to, in this regard, to students with Spanish language background experience who can be Spanish language models as well as English language models in both classes, as we strive for close to a 50-50 split. I think the things we've learned over the years is that we are getting a couple kids each year who are really well served entering the Comandantes program after kindergarten. Those tend to be students who either are Spanish dominant or somewhat bilingual. And we've had some success for families who are interested in integrating them into the program, and that's kind of supporting our numbers. we see lower transiency numbers in Comandantes than we see across the general population. Not marketed much. The N size is really small. So, I think I say that with a grain of salt, but, when what we're seeing is when families do enter Comandantes, we're not seeing lots of exodus out of Comandantes, which is always a good marker. But we're also seeing, families pretty dedicated and wanting to stay in it. Of course, people have lots of reasons why their lives change and people have to move to other areas. But, at this point, it's kind of neat being at Fort River last week where, we have 4 of the 7 grade levels have cohorts of Comandantes kids. It's very different than 4 years ago where there was the first cohort and there was it's exciting in a different way. Maybe I'll put it that way. And so, I want to thank Katie and the staff for building out that program. The summer experience was fabulous for the students to maintain that language exposure over the summer. And as we noted, the majority of kids in the program chose to spend at least part of the summer with us in that program. So you're certainly open to any questions, comments, kind of proposed changes to the enrollment policy. But I, want to thank you. It was, for those of you who were on the committee or paying attention at that point, it was a bit of a cumbersome process to figure out how to do this, effectively. And so we did draft upon draft upon draft, and we've adjusted things over time. So, we really appreciate it because on the other end, it's really mattered that we've been able to maintain the type of programming that we wanted for our students and for our community. Katie, anything I'm missing in terms of just overview comments before the committee may jump in with thoughts or questions or advice?
No, I think you covered most of it. Yeah, I guess, I would just add the piece that you mentioned about just seeing the program growing. I felt that in a nice way at the beginning of this year as we were able to really look at vertical alignment and, how is the program growing. So that's less on the enrollment piece, but just it's been really fun to see how the conversation is shifting as we hone our work and get better at how we do it as a program rather than at each grade level.
Question. Jennifer.
So thank you for, excuse me, sorry. Thank you for providing the data, and thank you to Katie for being here to talk to us tonight. I'm noting from the enrollment data that it looks like we took 6 Spanish-speaking school choice students this year and last year, as opposed to 2 in the previous 2 years. Is that because there weren't enough interested Spanish-speaking students in Amherst, and were non-native Spanish-speaking Amherst students unable to be offered slots? I'm just trying to figure out the fact that school choice students are getting into the program, and I know that the enrollment needs to be 50% native Spanish speakers and 50% non-native Spanish speakers. So I'm just trying to figure out how that all works. And are there Amherst students who weren't able to be offered spots, non-native Spanish speakers who weren't able to be offered slots? And then can you, sorry, since this is my first year and working with Comandantes, can you explain why the enrollment needs to be 50% native Spanish speaking and 50% not?
Katie, do you want to take this one?
Sure.
Okay.
So the rationale for the enrollment policy in terms of that 50-50 split is really based on guidance from our Department of Education documents, from our MABE, the Multi-State Association for Bilingual Ed, as well as other programs that we've worked with, where we committed to a 2-way immersion program, meaning that split allows us to have a mix of students who are learning with and from each other. And so having that balance is really important to how the program works. If we were to, in the future, consider shifting that balance significantly, we would be looking at more of a 1-way immersion model. And while that's not out of the question, that's not sort of in the purview of what we're doing right now or what the intention was when the program was designed, if that makes sense. And so given that 50-50 goal, that's where it makes sense to really hold the seats for Spanish speakers in the enrollment process. And so we do really take as many Spanish speakers from Amherst as we can, and we wait until later in August to invite any students who basically they have to be admitted into school choice first, separate from their language background. And then if they happen to be Spanish speakers and those seats haven't been filled come August, I forget if it's 5th or 15th in the policy, then we are able to offer those seats. And that has been a school committee discussion in the past. I certainly see the value of that, both for those students and for our program as a whole. And, you know, I think it's a tricky one, right? Because at times there are students in Amherst that are on a wait list. This year was the first year we didn't have that situation. We were actually allowed or able to offer seats to all of our English speaking Amherst students that wanted to join. My guess is that that's a fluke, right? But we'll see, given the numbers in the past. And another thing that as I looked at the data, I was noticing, I think when we developed the program, we had seen that there was an average of a little bit higher, maybe 19, I want to say. I'd have to go back and dig a little bit, but the number of Spanish speaking students that enrolled in kindergarten was a little bit higher, not a lot. And I think that we see and have seen less transients among our English learner population. We've seen fewer students coming to the area during COVID, and I think that that also will be shifting. So just to say, I think that it's kind of an odd time to look at that, the enrollment numbers, and, you know, as there's been some abnormalities in the student populations. But does that answer?
Can I add, Katie, to
Sure.
your question? Is that okay? I'm just checking with the chair as well. So I think the other thing, just to add to Katie's comments, I agree with everything she said, is that, you know, all the way back, we had a presentation from Phyllis Hardy, who's the head of the leader of MABE. By we, I mean the committee. She was emphatic about the desire for a 50-50 program. She felt like it socioculturally as well as instructionally, it really changes the program if you're not trying to maintain as best you can that number. And so that was really the origin, and at least at the time that the program was created, the focus was making sure that an intentional goal of the program was around the opportunity gap, particularly for ELL students, particularly for Latino students. And so it was prioritizing some students based on our current achievement levels over other students. And so that's always uncomfortable in every community. We're no different. But the feedback we heard from other communities that had a lot of community pressure to not do that was that the program itself was less successful and the outcomes were less successful. So thank you for reminding me, and it's a really great reminder. You know, this is year 7 for me in this role, and so I don't always do a good enough job of going back and explaining the history of that. So I appreciate the question. It's one that we had a lot of internal discussion before we made a recommendation to the committee all the way back when. But I think in my opinion, it's been the right decision to move the program forward.
It does make me wonder. I see your hand, Peter, but I want to stay on this thought because I think I don't know if we're explaining that repeatedly in sort of our public communication about Caminantes, especially when we're recruiting, doing kindergarten registration and outreach, in the spring, right, with the preschools. And I think that's a super important thing to explain, sort of the philosophy and sort of the program design, right? Like what is our strategy and what were our goals? And just, it doesn't need to be like long, but just sort of recapping that so that we're always grounding back into the why did we do this and what is our, what is the core of this program design, and just so that people understand that. So because this question is going to come up again and again and again, I'm sure. So it might be worth looking at how we can sort of think about the outreach materials that we do and that messaging. Peter.
Yeah, so just building on that theme, Mike, I think like an action item out of this is if you could maybe go back, or maybe you and Katie could go back to the presentation that we had leading up to the decision to start Caminantes. There were several slide decks that I thought were really excellent that summarized a lot of what Allison just talked about, and in particular presented the research about intervention for English language learners and how different approaches affected the achievement gap. Because I'll just plus one what Allison said. My recollection of that entire conversation, that entire process was that the primary driver of Caminantes is to offer a program, an educational opportunity for English language learners to close the achievement gap in a way that we've never been able to do before. You know, it started from looking at the persistent achievement gaps in across grades for English language learners, and then looking at the different kinds of, you know, shelter and immersion and pullout and other terminology that I don't have because I'm not an expert in this field, but the different approaches, right? And then the dual language immersion, particularly the dual language immersion model, and this is why that balance is so important, is the most effective intervention. Now, in addition to that, as we went over through the conversation, that expanded to other complementary reasons, right? Like there's such an embrace of culture in Amherst and a celebration of diversity that having the opportunity for native English speakers to learn Spanish in that kind of an environment was a tremendous draw, and the impact that it would have on Fort River as a building and a community. And then, you know, another side reason was, well, we have a charter school that offers single language immersion, and so this might draw some students away from that. You know, but my memory of that is that was more about like a side benefit. Obviously, you know, it packs our budget, and that's a huge driver. But really, what's driving this is meeting the needs of a population whose needs we weren't meeting. And so we had to do something about it. I think that helps then put into context things like, okay, well, why do we have a policy that waits so long in the summer to offer seats to choice students who are native Spanish speakers? And this is why, so that we can keep up the balance and therefore the quality and the effectiveness of the program. But anyway, I thought the materials that you all put together a few years ago, I think were really super and would help a lot in terms of fleshing this all out.
Any other questions or thoughts from the committee? Katie.
Just a quick response to share. So I think we do a lot of outreach and recruitment in the spring, and we do really try to share the information. But that's something that we keep working on, making sure that all of our families get the information and what other avenues. But we go visit all the preschools and, you know, make sure that there's plenty of information. We recently worked on a video, and that was one of the key pieces there, was to really center the benefits and experience for Spanish speaking students, and hoping that our website eventually will be able to reflect some of that too, as we're able to develop that more. So it's definitely on our radar. And I'll say it's challenging to keep up with, right? Because as you said, there's always new people to explain and make sure that it is really well shared and understood.
Definitely. Thank you. Jennifer.
You mentioned MABE, the Multi-State Association for Bilingual Education. Will they be coming back to like do a review of Common Ideas, or to like to see how we're doing, or do they get involved in any type of like review of our program?
Absolutely. So we work really closely with them in a lot of different ways. They provided us with a year one program review, which of course was right around when everything shut down. And so we held on to that report and those goals and really tried to work with those goals starting more last year. We're continuing to dig into those goals this year with support from them. So we have a contract with them to do some professional development work with us. And we participate in a variety of activities that they offer. I would love to see another program review probably in the next couple of years, you know, not quite yet, because we know we've identified lots of things that we're still working on. But we have them as a fantastic resource all the time in terms of both leadership, teacher development, and opportunities outside of the district.
Any other questions? No? Oh, Jennifer.
So are we going to talk about the extended absence, re-enrollment, and transfer policy as part of this agenda item? Or is that something that we need to talk about or vote on, or is it?
That's a good question. I wasn't sure. Mike.
I mean, it's certainly in your purview. If you'd like to offer feedback, we could do it tonight. We could bring it back more specifically a different night. It's really up to the committee.
Since it's a policy, I might suggest that we ask any clarifying questions right now in public, and then at our next meeting, if a vote is necessary, then we'll take it at that meeting. Also, because we have a lot of topics on our agenda tonight. Jennifer.
So I guess the extended absence and re-enrollments section where it details the reasons that we would allow a student to be absent from the program, and I guess my question is like, what is the problem that policy is trying to address? Because there's specifics about like, if they're going to be away for longer than the stated days, that there must be a written plan submitted. Like, what is the problem that's trying to address? Is there a problem currently, or is this like an anticipation of a problem?
I can start at a broad level and then I'll have Katie get to the specifics. So again, what we heard from other districts with dual language programs is if students are away from the program and they lose language acquisition, particularly of non-native Spanish speaking students who are away and they go half a year without having Spanish instruction, it's almost as if other students who miss a year of instruction in general, right? And it's hard to mimic that. And when they returned, the gaps in their achievement and skill level were so much that it was putting undue pressure on staff members to try to work with them because it's just not something that is easily mimicked, right? It's not something that's like for many families homeschoolable, so to speak. And so what the advice we received at the beginning when we're setting up the program is people really have to commit, and commitment means staying within the program. And if that means that they're going to take a year and be somewhere else for a year, the program may not be the best fit because asking staff to recover, do individual student recovery based on that is not consistent with the goals of the program and perhaps unfair to the staff and thus other students who are working through that. That's not about student skill level. That's not about special needs. This is really about not being part of a dual language program and the implications for how learning works when you're learning two languages half a day in each language. So Katie can fill in more details, but that's sort of where it came from, was the advice that some schools were having lots of this, and it was being very disruptive to individual students, that it wasn't in their best interest, that if they're going to be away for that long, it's probably better to stick to English. And then if they did come back and did have a gap in achievement, it was very frustrating for the student and then the staff as members as well. But Katie, you can jump in if you have more to add.
Sure. Yeah. So I was going to say, I mean, we have started to have requests and questions come up about this, which is why we tried to really outline it. You know, certainly we don't want to penalize any families who need to be away for a family emergency or a medical situation. But sometimes folks do some less essential, I guess, you know, there's some movement, right? And less of a commitment. And so we're trying to, as Dr. Morris said, you know, really encourage that we need the commitment for folks to see the outcomes. And then just have some ways of figuring out how do we think about what that really means, right? For a kindergarten student who's been learning in a new language for, you know, half a year, that looks different than by fourth grade if you've had, you know, 4 years of solid bilingual instruction, right? So trying to think about that, the process of learning bilingually and how to be kind of thoughtful in terms of the outcomes, in terms of staffing needs, and make it a good experience for everybody. I think the other thing that's important to note is that this really comes more for students on the English speaking side, in that anybody who is a Spanish speaker does have more of that flexibility because they're coming with the Spanish language skills, right? And so as the part where it says transferring into the program, like in general, we're always going to accept a Spanish speaking English learner into the program, right? So just to clarify that point, that you know, really centering their needs continues, and that this is for Spanish learners who maybe are in flux in different ways. Yeah, I think that's the main rationale.
Thank you. Jennifer.
Thank you. That's very helpful to hear that. I guess the one piece of input I'll give on the policy is that I note the inclusion of parent sabbatical next to family emergency or medical need for reasons that your child can be absent for the number of days listed. And that this sort of made me think for a second, because it seems to prioritize our privileged families with a parent in a profession that offers sabbaticals. And there are so few professions like academia and clergy, or those are the two that came to my mind, those two that offer sabbaticals, whereas, parents who don't work in those professions, aren't included in this. So when I look at the ABC bullet points of the number of days you can be absent by year, and then like the letter C, which has like, you can request a longer time if you can submit a plan for ongoing Spanish language activities. Like, what if we just made these bullet points applicable to anyone who's going to be away for any reason, regardless of what the reason is? And I mean, I certainly feel like family emergency and medical need are valid, but maybe if they can comply with the requests, maybe it doesn't matter why they're going to be away.
Thank you. That's really helpful feedback. I appreciate it, Jennifer. And that's something that Katie and I can talk about. But my response after hearing it directly and without talking about it with Katie and giving it more thought is that seems like a really logical and more clear way to apply things more universally. So I appreciate the feedback.
Sorry, I lost my cursor. If there's no other questions, we'll come back to this again at our next meeting. So next up is our FY22 budget Q4 update. And welcome, Doug. Thank you, Katie, for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much.
And yep, so I'll turn it over to Doug and Mike for this to kick off this discussion.
I'll just turn it straight to Doug. No intro. I think you got the drill, right? So I'll turn it right to Doug.
Okay. So I'll bring up, I'm sharing the document that was in your packet. It was updated, somewhat recently. And so I do want to talk to that point a little bit with you, but I'll try to be very concise tonight and let you sort of pose the questions that have caught your eye relative to this report. Long story short is we finished our budget year much closer to where we would like to be generally in any given budget year, which is just under the budgeted amount. So we're pretty close to that by being less than 1% below fully expending our entire budget. I think that's a good place because I think that indicates that we've taken the resources that were made available to us from the town of Amherst and taxpayers and utilized them to the full extent possible and try to leverage those as best we can to meet the needs of the students. And so that's really the really short story about what this is telling us. There are places where we are a little better or worse relative to our estimates of where some things were going to finish up, but nonetheless, we were keeping an eye on the overall target of the budget and staying within that. And so I think we did that pretty well this year, a little more concisely. We had a little less volatility than the last couple of years with COVID, so it was a little, I think, more typical in how we sort of finished up the year. There was still some volatility there and some things happening for our staff and in our schools that does make some of it hard to predict in those last months or so, as I note in the text there. The one thing I'll point out just relative to what you first saw probably Friday afternoon versus what you saw coming out earlier this week. Had conversation with the town of Amherst. We looked at our food service revolving fund. What you see here is the budget support. So each year we put a certain amount of budget support within our operating budget to help support the food service program. Given the current level of, or during last year's school year, the amount of support from the federal government in particular relative to meal service was really quite generous. They reimbursed every single meal as if it were a free lunch meal, and they increased the amount of reimbursement per meal. And so that really helped our bottom line relative to that revolving fund where we keep track and expend most of the money relative to food service. When I first sort of sent this to you, I had presumed what we normally need to do is just provide a little support from our budget, our general fund budget to that fund. And I had, essentially moved that money into that food service revolving fund to help it out. In conversation with the town of Amherst, we looked at that balance a little bit. There are some limits on what we can put into that fund. And so they were like, hey, you're getting kind of close to that limit. So we essentially moved it back. And what happens at that point is instead of sitting in our revolving fund for food service operation, it goes back to the town and becomes part of their free cash certification and reserves for the town of Amherst. But nonetheless, it made no material impact on our ability to finish and keep our other areas of the budget supported in the way they needed to. So I think I'll stop right there, see if there are any questions from any of you all about any of the particular aspects of the budget. And happy to answer those questions.
Peter.
So what's the limit on that line item, and did we zero it out, or did we take it down to the limit?
You mean as far as the food service?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can typically, I mean, it's an interesting circumstance because they have some general guidelines about what your balance should look like. And they typically say, oh, it should be, roughly 3 months worth of expenses or so. We're a little above that at this point in time. There has been some intention with regarding to that. We negotiated a contract with our staff that gave some necessary and significant increases in pay. And so that was, I was anticipating that cost being a little higher over the last year. We had some difficulty staffing that fully all year long. And so that creates some savings that weren't there. So that allowed for our balance to rise a little bit. I think the other thing is we're trying to be as self-sufficient within food service. So there's some, there are some capital needs within food service. So, we need to buy steam tables or replacement equipment, mixers or whatever it is. So, I have been intentionally building a little bit of a balance in that food service for the purposes of meeting the needs of those kinds of capital items and addressing more of their day-to-day, operational costs that it would be nice if they took on and kind of shared that burden a little bit more. So that's the intention there. But we're, it's not a hard limit of how high that balance can be, but, we're at a place where, we're fine and we're comfortable, but we didn't want to exacerbate a situation that would prompt, uncomfortable questions from auditors and the like.
Irv.
Doug, question. This is one of these questions when people look at budgets and see some of the words that are then printed in support of the budget. You're left thinking, well, what does this mean? So this is, what does this mean question. The first sentence in your states that the Amherst Elementary School district budget finished FY22 under budget by $128,072. All right. And then the last sentence says, however, collectively, we were able to finish the year utilizing our budget fully and in a good position financially. So I'm trying to figure out, how do you use the budget fully, but you're also under budget?
Right. Well, I think the fact that we're at, over 99% utilization of the budget that was appropriated would be considered fully utilizing the budget. It may be a bit of semantics there, but I get your point as far as that is concerned. $190,000 is a non-trivial amount of money. We talk a lot of times about much smaller amounts, but as a piece of the entirety of the budget and the number of things we have going on, that's actually a pretty decent place to be in our finishing. But I think we were able to do the things we needed to do within our budget and utilize virtually all of it for the purpose of meeting the needs of the students.
Mike?
Yeah, just to add to that point, because I think it's a good one. I'm glad we're talking about it. I think Doug explained the food service, which was sort of unanticipated. Right, there's another draft of this document that did not include that. I think the other thing that sometimes is hard for folks for us that we don't do a good job explaining, I'll put it that way, is really can't be on the other end of that, right? So if we had a negative 200,000. We'd have a big problem because we're a public school. We're not a corporation. We can't be like, oh yeah, we had $200,000 in losses one year. Like we have to balance. And I think one of the challenges of not just Doug, but any finance department of any school district is there's a natural bias to be a bit conservative towards the end because the costs of making a mistake are so significant. And you just have to Google districts and districts that end the year in the negative, and the implications that has of going back to the town and asking for funds, or doing kind of odd transfers at the end of the year, that take away funds not for the right thing, right? So I do think it's worth noting the 0.8, and also that it was lower number than this food service piece adjusted it, but it's also that the constraints on school business managers are so strict in terms of ending the budget, neutral or a bit positive, that it's significant. And this is pretty typical. I mean, the town also often ends the year with balances that go into free cash that helps the town's finances. And when things help the town's finances, that's good for us in future years. So it doesn't quite pay it forward, but there is an element to that as well. So just wanted to kind of note that in addition to what Doug added.
Yeah, and it's one of these damned if you do and damned if you don't kind of situations, because someone would say, well, that was great. You ended the year with $128,000. However, that $128,000, what that means is it wasn't spent on somewhere else. That could have been spent. So and I understand, I really understand that it is a tightrope that you're walking. And the town does the same thing. And they could be subject to the same kind of comment that I'm making. It's just an observation. It is something that that is like almost like an artifact of the budget process. But I do appreciate the clarity in terms of you communicating that to us, and I thank you for
it. I think. So I'll just sort of add to that. I think, we talk about this as, during the budget development process, right? Like it's a fine line that we walk together. It's not just the school district. I think the school committee owns the budget that then the district is managing too, and having to manage to make sure that we don't go over. And I think that speaks to a lot of the things that we talked about this past budget cycle. And when we get into, hopefully it's a few more months before we get into the next budget cycle, is talking about how we build in that flexibility to make sure that we have that ability to sort of pivot and flex without going over, and trying to figure out the ways that we get as close as possible to, 99.9% budget utilization without going over, right? And the trick there is sort of finessing what is that balance, and sort of the flexibility that we build into the budget. We don't budget to exactly the most conservative estimate of our expenses, I think is sort of that. And I appreciate that we were this close this year. So that is thank you for all of your hard work, Doug and team.
If I may add, it's actually a cooperative process with everybody in the district. Our principals and our administrators and all our staff are all sort of partners in keeping an eye on this. And we want to, as I say to people, it's like, we've given the money to spend. It's okay to spend it. Let's just not waste it and spend it on the things we're trying to spend it on. And as things change and evolve during a given school year, and a lot of things change in ways that you're not anticipating and can't anticipate. And so we, adjust and move to adapt to those needs and those demands as they arise. And that's where, that communication from staff through the buildings and through the directors and that sort of thing to Mike and myself is really quite helpful in keeping us on budget and able to sort of manage our resources and apply them in the places that, make the most difference.
Sure. Any other questions in the budget? I'm not seeing any, so we'll move on to another budget topic, which is our charter school cost distribution model with the town. And this is essentially how are we as a town and school district paying for and accounting for the cost of charter tuition that we are responsible for. This was a topic that we talked about, I don't know if it was a year ago or 6 or 8 months ago, but it was in the last school year, we did talk a little bit about this. And as I mentioned in my update, the budget coordinating group is going to be taking this up and talking about that as a group. So that's why I'm going to bring it here. It was February. Thank you, Peter. So I attached, thank you, Peter, for resharing the presentation. I attached that earlier this evening. So it's included in the agenda for convenience, so you don't have to go back to the February meeting to look for that. And I'll turn it over to Peter in case you want to, or Doug. I don't know who would like to sort of introduce this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could just round out what you introduced, Allison. I didn't know this was going to be an agenda, so I was happy to see it there because it's so. Like you said, we have the budget coordinating group. I think what would be most helpful is maybe to get a sense of, does the committee have an updated preference about how we would like to proceed? Because budget coordinating group, generally speaking, is going to the, we represent the committee and we talk to the town about these kinds of issues, and this is one of the issues that's on our BCG agenda. So just, the thumbnail reminder of what the nuts and bolts of this is that, the charter school tuition is a cost of the town. That's the way it is across the state. And then when towns pay that cost, they have a decision to make. Do they pay it out of the general budget and then do their annual budget process separately from that, in which, if they're going to give all the departments the same, that if all the schools get the same as everybody else, or do they take it directly out of the school budget and sort of dock the schools for minus directly from what the guidance might otherwise be. So in Amherst, it comes out of the school budget directly, and in the districts I was able to contact, about 25 of them, the vast majority of them, 20, don't do that. So we're in the distinct minority of practice. And the impact of that is that if our charter school tuition bill goes up, then we feel the pain of that acutely. Conversely, if the charter bill goes down, we feel the benefit of that acutely. Whereas if you did it the opposite way and you took it out of the town's general budget, then, of course, every department feels the pain, but it's spread around. And so it would be much less acute. And if we recoup charter tuition costs, then everybody benefits, again, in a less acute fashion. So we could just go to the BCG and say, we have no opinion. What do you all think? Or we could say, we would like to go one way or the other. My feeling is that it makes sense to do best practice. And I like the idea of increased stability. I've always been very concerned about large swings in charter schools, not knowing what the future charter school landscape might bring, knowing that we've had some pretty aggressive attempts at expansion in years past. And so I personally, I like the idea of it. I like the principle of sort of being a more direct partner with the town in terms of charter school finance and advocacy, and sort of all ships rise or fall together. But that's just my take, and I guess it would be nice to hear from the rest of the committee if we have feelings on that.
Irv.
Yeah, I've heard this before, Peter, and one of the things that I would be interested in is, what is the rationale of those towns who take it out of their general budget rather than charging it back to the school? What's the rationale for those towns for doing that? And also, they obviously have public support for it, but it would be really, really good to find out why they do that. Because Amherst, I am 100% sure, will fight back in terms of us asking them to do the same thing. So I would, it would be just good to have those as talking points if we in fact want to ask for this benefit.
Peter?
So, to answer your question directly, I haven't asked that question specifically to finance directors or town managers of Northampton or Belchertown or Hadley or East Hampton or any of these other places that take it out of town budget. My guess is, given its prevalence, like 80% of the districts I was able to get info from, it's a town cost. Like, so the state charges the town directly for charter tuition, and so it seems to be the default practice, right? And so Amherst, Leicester, Revere, Sandwich, Ware, those are the only communities that I was able to identify that don't do it that way. And in terms of like what the town's response is, I wouldn't make any assumptions. I think I talked. So we Doug and I met with Sean Mangano, the town's finance director, about this, just to see what a good next step would be in the conversation, and that's when he recommended we go to the budget coordinating group. You know, like I think there's some historical reasons in Amherst in terms of like how the budget is reported, and how those costs are accounted for. I think, ironically, I think it was probably an effort to make it clearer, and yet I think it sort of it muddied the waters quite a bit. With you know, we have the financial indicators meeting every kickoff budget season, and there's always a confusion over, okay, well, why is the school budget 273 or 242 and not the 25, right? So I mean, I don't know. I would like to have an open-minded conversation and say, okay, well, it seems like everybody else does this. That seems like a good principled way to go at it. You know, I don't see a driving need to have an exception. You know, what do you all think? I think that's how I think that would be a productive tact to go at it for. But you know, certainly want to hear from them.
I think I would encourage the committee to pursue this. I mean, not to pursue it would not be good. And you know, I'm not optimistic, but I always would like to pursue additional income than not to pursue it. So, you know, as in any sales call, they can only say no. But if you don't ask, you never know.
Jennifer.
Yeah, I agree that sorry, I agree that I'd like to see us continue this discussion with the town, whether it's the budget coordinating group or whoever we discuss it with, because, I mean, not so much because like I don't have an opinion one way or the other, but because like I assume this is going to be a complex topic that will have many consequences and implications that maybe I'm not thinking up off the top of my head. So I'd like to hear about what the consequences would be of trying to do this and be able to make an educated decision or recommendation about it. So I'm open to, I would like to see us continue to pursue this with the town. And it's, I don't really see it as like they say yes or no, but that like we're opening a conversation and seeing like what the options are.
I agree. I think it's definitely worth having the conversation. Not necessarily because I think it would mean greater revenue for the schools, but I think, Peter, as you introduced it, it's more smoothing of it. So we don't see sort of that, really acute impact. It's sort of more diffuse for any one department, and makes it also, from an explanatory perspective, easier to explain the increase. So it's 2.5% for every department, not 2.5 for everybody, and then 2.621 for the schools because of charter schools, right? So I think that for that reason, it's worth having the conversation and seeing where it goes. Doug?
I'll just add a couple of pieces of information here. I think we're probably in about as good a time frame as any to have this conversation with the state, because there's sort of two parts to your charter questions. What do we get charged, and then what do we get reimbursed from the state? Because the state does have a reimbursement for some of the initial costs of charter school children, and so it has been fairly stable. That amount of money, that difference between those two, has been a bit more stable. Not a lot of volatility in the last couple of years, so it's a little easier time for the town to make some sort of change if they chose to. I think it probably goes back. The reason why we have it the way we have it is that it goes back to when charter schools first started, and so the increases were more significant. And by doing it this way, it's it motivates school committees and superintendents and finance directors to take action to try to retain those students instead of having them go to charter schools. So I think that was perhaps some of the rationale to it as well. There are other places of the town government where there's a as they say, a cherry sheet, either positive or negative that applies, and we do or don't explicitly apply it to the budget or don't. Chapter 70 essentially is the same thing. In other words, that's a revenue for the town. The town is going to fund at a level higher than that generally for Amherst, and has for many years. But there are communities where that's not the case, where Chapter 70 is given to the town for the purpose of education, but they're not compelled to necessarily spend the entirety of it on education. And there are some cases in recent years where towns have done that, and it causes a lot of angst, I guess, is a simple way to put it. But I think because we're in a fairly stable place, the state's not generally playing around with the reimbursement formula either. They did that a lot in the first few years. They've kind of stabilized on that. Now, whether they're funding the full reimbursement formula is another conversation. But it's been fairly steady. I think that makes it easier for the town to have the conversation. And I think the key thing is that the first year or two that we do it is when the school district benefits most, as far as it would add most to our base in the first year, and then after that it would be a much more minor sort of implication to the school district. But those are just a couple things to give a little perspective, and also some other pieces of the puzzle. So I hope that's helpful to you.
I think you bring up a really good point too, Doug. That sharing the reimbursement back to the schools is completely discretionary. And so in our current situation, if the school is burdened with the expense, but the town reserves the right to not share the reimbursement with the schools, then that puts us in a precarious situation every year, or potentially precarious. I think us as members of the BCG, we have our direction. If there's, given that time and we still have some significant topics, I'm going to ask if you have anything new to say. If it's not something new or a different direction, then we'll ask that we can move on to the next agenda item. Is that okay?
Yeah, I don't know whether you were saying you're going to recognize me or not, so I'm just going to talk.
I'm just I just ask you to be mindful of the time and sort of let us know if it's something new or different versus what we've been talking about already.
No, it's the same thing that we've been talking about, and what I guess I want to do is encourage a rationale and a particular approach in relationship to talking about this with the town in terms of charter schools that would allow us to make a argument that would ascertain the kinds of rebuttals we would be coming back at us. In other words, I would like to see a win-win strategy that is put forward. And again, it's not me, because I'm not putting forth the strategy. I don't know what the strategy is. Don't know what the tactics are. But I would encourage that those things be thought about very carefully.
Thank you. So with that, we'll move on to our next item, which is an update on the planning for the 6th grade move to the regional middle school. And as I introduce this, I just want to talk about, there's lots of topics and things covered in the report. This is a meeting of the Amherst Elementary School Committee. So I just want to make sure that we are thoughtful about talking about specifically about the 6th grade curriculum, and not sort of the implications about the middle school itself or the middle school administration, but really looking at the 6th grade impacts, I think.
Sure. Thank you. So Mary Kiley, who is our curriculum coordinator, is here, and I want to thank Mary for facilitating the group that met in late June. Seems like a long time ago now to be together this report. And really, I'm going to describe just process pieces of it, process aspects, and then if the committee members want to dig in on any of the content, certainly can. But Mary and I met earlier today, and that's kind of how we thought it would be best to frame it for the committee. So the working group worked for the better part of 5 days. I want to share my appreciation for the work. It's not easy, right? I mean, even the way you preface the meeting, Allison, is so consistent with the number of overlapping bureaucratic and non-bureaucratic items that come along with this one. We talk about building project later. I didn't think there'd be an item that bureaucratically was smoother than, or less smooth than MSBA processes, but I think we found one. So I really do appreciate the committee for working through the, things that the committee members, myself, and to a certain extent, central office staff work through regularly, but most people don't have to manage the multiple districts and, who governs what and how that works. And they did it with aplomb. So they were great. We did have staff members from the elementary and middle school level there. We tried to balance them from all 3 elementary schools and by role, including special ed and regular ed and specials. And their task was to publish a document that they'd share with me to share with the larger community to gather feedback. So we were really clear that this wasn't a decision-making group. It wasn't like, oh, this is what's going to happen. But we wanted to get something concrete enough where people could respond to. And I think they did that incredibly well. The document was in the packet. We published a document because there was some interest to it. I want to thank my Amherst College intern this summer, Margot, who participated and worked with Debbie Osmorland and Mary and Stephanie Joyce to put it all together. We decided to send it out in the summer, knowing that people would be away and not everyone would pay attention, but there would be people who were chomping at the bit to read it and offer feedback. We did get some feedback, not a tremendous amount. We included that in the packet tonight as well. And then we went to high density housing areas, went to 3 during food pickup times to talk to families directly in person. And we did get some really helpful feedback there as well. Our plan for continuing the engagement is to resend that same document out in the next week or 2 with a little more focus on some questions. Mary and I were meeting before. We didn't finalize it, but certainly the language and language, how students acquire language, what options they have is one that we've already gotten some anecdotal feedback on. And there's some other areas that we want to really, hear directly from folks. We also now have enrollment data. It looks like we have about 139 students in the Amherst 6th grade right now. And so one of the key questions is how many core classrooms you have. And, the committee was operating off an assumption of about 11, 12 more students. And you might say 11, 12, that's not much of a difference. It actually does make quite a difference in terms of class size and implications. So we're going to send it out again to all staff, all families. We'll look for feedback. We'll do more forums, both in person and virtual. And we want to get more student feedback, and particularly going to 5th grade. As we remember, last year we went to 6th grade, we went to middle school, but we're getting close enough where we want to go to the direct audience of students most affected, who are 5th grade classrooms. So we're going to, collect additional feedback, and with that feedback, we would expect that we'll make revisions to this document. And we'd like to come back to you probably 6 weeks or so from now. End of September, probably too ambitious. Hopefully we can figure out a time and mid to late October. I know we'll talk about future agendas coming up soon, and share a new revised version that is based on the feedback we hear from students, staff, and families. And again, to use a word I keep using, we'll go around for another round of iterative feedback. So, it's intended to improve over time, and that's what we'll do. We're also going to find that the documents become more specific as we go over time. Now that we know, how many 6th grade students we have now, we can take a better look at the number of sections and be really specific about, for instance, what grade sizes look like in different models. All that will happen throughout the fall. And the goal is to bring that plan to you on your last meeting in mid to late December for you to adopt the model. And at that point, once it's adopted, we'll start the process of starting to fill it with our current staff members. So we're intentionally holding off on identifying who's interested, all those pieces, until we have a really articulated plan that we know is going to happen. And so that process with HR will take place in the winter and early spring. We also want to make sure that we're getting students over to the middle school, 5th and 6th grade students, the building in a different way than we typically would have in terms of preparing them. So kind of the next phase for us is hearing what feedback the committee has tonight, process or content, but really going around and getting much more feedback than we were able to get over the summer months, understandably enough. And I don't look back regretting that. I'm glad we got it out soon. And for people who did read it, I got some emails that were just like, hey, I'll get back into this in the fall, but thanks for sending it out in the summer. And I think that matters. It wasn't like it was something that was sitting on the shelf for a couple months. We got it out there for folks. Mary, I'm trying to think, is there anything I'm omitting that from process perspective that you'd like to share?
Just one small point I would add, Mike, and that is that the planning group, when we met, we did it with the lens that this was a 1-year plan. And that based on the experience of the first year, it may change, but that was our lens, that it was really, we were planning for the first year of the transition.
No, that's a really important point. And if I could add to what you said, I'm being conscious of time as well, is that, we want to plan for the first year and have a very direct eye to assessment and evaluation of how things are going from all stakeholder groups to make adjustments over time. Because, we would anticipate, it's a funny word to use, I would say we would expect that the collaboration between sixth grade students, sixth grade staff members, and both what we should do to prepare them for fifth grade, as well as what their experience after they're in sixth grade and they go on to seventh and eighth grade in a different district. Both of those are really huge variables that we should be assessing and collecting data on over time, so that it feeds us into a better program that we're getting. In other words, we're doing this for, we're putting in things in place we think is the best year. And the process of building the sixth grade program doesn't end at the end of the first year of sixth graders being educated in the middle school. So we're trying to be very intentional about that, sometimes you do these processes, it happens and boom, you get busy and you don't do it. And we want to have a very firm evaluation plan that's tied to this, so that, we're continuing to gather feedback from stakeholders and make improvements over time. And with that, I think Mary and I will turn it over to the committee for any feedback, comments that you might have.
Questions? Jennifer.
I have two concerns and a question. But first, Mike, when did you say that the model would be brought to the school committee for approval? You mentioned a month, but I didn't hear it.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I would anticipate that being in December.
December, cool. Okay, so my first concern is that ELL was not included in the planning, which I know, sorry, I'm gonna stop it first and say, the document is great. I really enjoyed reading it because it really helped me wrap my head around like what this all means and how this various ways that this could work. And I know the document does acknowledge that no ELL faculty member was available to participate in this work, and that is what it is. But no, I guess I'm concerned that like now ELL is going to have to fit in with what the recommendations that were already made, and how is that going to work, and what are the opportunities for ELL faculty to give their input and recommendations?
Yeah, can I jump in on that? And then I'll turn to Mary. I think I'll start actually with a non-ELL example. So one of the other groups that we felt like was not included, just based on who volunteered to participate, was intensive special needs. So we did have a meeting with intensive special needs folks maybe 2 weeks ago. I'm looking at Mary, in that vicinity anyway. And that feedback has been essential and will inform the next version of the plan. Similarly, I think for ELL folks, I would anticipate the same thing taking place. I think the grain size right now, we're not on the ground yet with this plan. It's like still at that 4,000, 5,000 foot level. And as we develop and gather more feedback, I think they'll be able to work in with more specificity how that operates. But Mary and Katie already have been connecting and trying to schedule that time. It was not ideal. I agree with the concern, absolutely, as does Mary. We've talked about it a couple of times, and we can't compel people to do things that they don't do for a whole variety of good reasons. People are away and involved in other workshops, but I do believe we'll be able to integrate that into the plan based on our experience with the intensive special needs.
Great, thank you. I'll let Irv go first before I ask my next question.
Yeah, and what I'm gonna do is make sure that everybody has a chance to ask at least one question before we go back for seconds. Irv.
So I want to start by saying I was mightily impressed by the document. It indicated an incredible level of work and attention to detail that went into it. And I guess the only thing I wished that I would have had it a lot more opportunity to go through it in more detail than I did. However, what is there is impressive. And I think that like any startup program, anywhere, anytime, anyhow, you have a program that's going to be a startup program going into a new situation, that you can expect all kind of blips, all kinds. It's just a part and parcel of it. But I do appreciate the level of detail that was in the plan and your careful thoughts that went into it. And in fact, I was thinking that it's exciting to plan this project and the move of the sixth graders to the middle school because it's a new opportunity to rethink sixth grade education. And that does not happen very much and very often in education, that teachers and administrators can collaborate on something new. So I really, really appreciate the work that you put into this.
Peter.
So I'll agree with Jennifer that the doc is great in terms of like getting your feedback, getting something to react to.
Right.
I do wish the word recommendation had not been used. I wish like option or I don't know, some kludgy, this is something to react to so we can get the feedback process going word. I just think but it's so hard, right? Because you want something that carries the weight of people thought about this, experienced educators thought about this, and this is more than just a random collection of ideas. And yet the process that Dr. Morse described of wanting the feedback and iterative nature of the ultimate plan is authentic. And so that's just a change management thing you're gonna have to deal with in the public. So yeah, in the interest of time, I won't mention everything in here that I like. I do like the idea of a separate staff member as the leadership model, like leading sixth grade. I think it would be pretty darn challenging for this to be like a side gig of a teacher that has other responsibilities as well. And if that means it has to elevate to an assistant principal or an administrator position and that the school committee has to consider the budget implications about that, I think we should have that discussion. I think particularly in the first year or so, it's going to benefit from that kind of oversight. I think in the communications, we need to talk about the start time change. It might not dawn on everyone that when you get bused to the middle school and you're a sixth grader, you're going to be starting at the same late start time as unless Dr. Morris is vigorously shaking his head, but that's my that's my assumption. And so that's a change, right, to one of our elementary grades, and so we have to think about that. I will say about the language option, that was the recommendation that I think most stood out to me that I didn't totally agree with much. I think I love the idea of a world studies culture history course and the benefit of that to students, but then that's what that is. It's a world studies course. It's not a language course. And one of the drivers we talked about for a long time in terms of the carrot benefits that a lot of parents have been asking for is earlier language acquisition opportunity. And so I think we maybe need to think about how can we still provide that. I've had some discussions, and I understand the problems with trying to learn 2 or 3 or 4 languages over the course of a year and how that might not be the best idea, but maybe the simple idea of just going straight to the first year of language. I mean, I know fifth graders are going to have to select that kind of sight unseen, but that's what fifth graders, but that's what sixth graders do right now when they start language in seventh. Anyway, I think that was the one point I would like to have a lot more in-depth kind of rolling about discussion. Because I think we need to sort of establish that sooner rather than later, because it has follow-on implications. Like if you do 1A in sixth grade and then you do 1B in seventh grade, then you're ready for year 2 in eighth grade, which typically our seventh and eighth graders aren't ready until ninth grade, right? And so we're going to need sections of that, or let them go to the high school or whatnot. Anyway, so I think there's just a lot of implementation details that impact from any of these decisions. So the sooner the better. But that's it. Yeah. So I appreciate having this much to chew on at this stage.
I will add my voice to the many of praise for this report. What I really appreciated was sort of the glimpse into the thought process that led to each recommendation. So it wasn't just sort of here's a presentation and here's what we're saying, but really sort of what were some of the other considerations that were part of that sort of led to that sort of and as I read through it, it didn't feel like it was sort of carved in stone. I sort of actually think that because the word recommendation was used, it sort of got people to pay more attention to it. And I think if it was like, oh, we're thinking about these things, we might not have gotten, or you might not have gotten some of the feedback because, a lot of times, sometimes people feel like when the train's left the station, that's when people pay attention and notice. And so by using that word, maybe that got people to pay attention. I don't know. One of the things that I sort of noticed throughout, and then in reading some of the feedback that you've received from the report, as well as others, is and then just actually taking a giant step up, is there's a lot of emotion around this transition in the district, and particularly with families with younger children who haven't yet experienced sixth grade and the middle school. Um, and I think one of the things, there was a lot of attention throughout the report to safety and safety and keeping the sixth graders safe and separate. And I think I would sort of wonder, I'm just wondering more than sort of counseling, but I think the more emphasis we put on that, the more that sort of reinforces the sense that this is a really scary move that my child might not be ready for. Um, and so I don't know how to address that, but I think we need to really acknowledge both that sort of emotion and sort of both the excitement as well as the nervousness, but in a way that doesn't sort of reinforce that nervousness, and sort of is a positive approach rather than thinking about all the ways that we're going to avoid the possible negatives of this move, right. um, and I think talking more about some of those things about how how sixth grade can still be sixth grade, without talking about how we're going to protect them and keep them separate because it's a scary world out there. I think that just sort of reinforces and can exacerbate some of the feelings of nervousness as opposed to helping people, embrace this and think through this and sort of get to the point that that it's a comfortable move. Um, and the other now, the other thing, so language was one thing that I remember people earlier on in some of the feedback that families were really excited about. And I think extracurriculars and athletics was another one. And I felt that that would be a really good next step to really ponder, and sort of dig into a little bit more, is what does that look like? We saw a lot of comments in there about recess and movement breaks and sort of figuring that out. And I think sort of answering the question about how do sixth graders integrate into some of the athletics opportunities or other extracurriculars opportunities, in the school, I think would be another good thing to look at next.
Mhm.
Any other comments? I just want to look at Ben, if you had anything you wanted to add before we go back for a second comments.
Yeah. Like in the interest of time, I don't want to add too much to this, but I did want to like extend my appreciation for like the level of work that went into this. And I mean, this is a very comprehensive document. I'd say the one aspect that I'd like to kind of learn more about, or I guess specifically as it pertains to here, is like the school within a school concept. I know previously we had looked at possibly having Crocker Farm students kind of fold into the middle school at one point, and I think that was the general idea there. But I kind of like that as a model, and I'd like to learn more about how we're adapting that to this situation. But yeah, overall, I'm very appreciative of the work that went into this.
Jennifer.
Thank you. So my only other concern was it seemed like the 4-team schedule was the preferred recommendation or the preferred option. And I know that for the 4-team schedule, it says teacher collaboration would take place at meetings before school begins. And so I'm concerned that when and if that model gets chosen and when and if this moves forward, that teachers would be asked or expected to work outside their work hours. And I assume that would be like a labor management discussion and they would be compensated, and that would be something that's discussed and not just, enacted on staff.
Yep, I think if I could respond to that, I think that's spot on. I think with 139 students, just bluntly, I don't think that's fiscally going to be an advisable model. I think, when we were thinking it was going to be 155 or something like that, that one. So, and your point's well taken. And again, this was drafted by people who would be directly affected by that. So it would, I think there would be other aspects that will likely have to be labor management along the way on this one altogether. But certainly that would be one of them. But I don't think that's in my personal opinion, I don't think that's going to be the viable option for us. Given the number of students we have, it'll either be 6 or 7.
Mhm.
Any other questions or comments? Yep. Great. Well, thank you again for all of the work and that's been happened and is going to come.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Yes. Good evening, everyone.
And next up, we have elementary school building project update. And Mike shared with us the good news that I'll let you share with the committee and the public right now. Oh, you're still muted.
So I did put this on the board docs as well, but this morning we were at an MSBA board meeting. I do want to appreciate there was broad participation at that meeting, including Senator Comerford, Representative Dom, obviously the architects and OPM, but also couple town councilors, the council president, Kathy Shane, who's a town councilor, but also the chair of the building committee, town staff. So we had a big group, and went very, very smoothly. There were actually no clarifying questions asked. And the meeting, just to be clear, was that there was a submittal, and then there's a feedback loop where they offer comments. We respond to the comments, and unanimously the board voted to approve Town of Amherst to proceed into schematic design. So it's the next phase of the design process, which is a major milestone. At every phase in the process, it requires a vote of the MSBA board. The MSBA board meets rather infrequently, every other month. So you have to really hit your timelines and accept feedback, respond to feedback, and make adjustments over time. And so that is really good news. The next steps in our process will be going much more detailed design. The architects met with the intentional special needs folks 2 weeks ago. They're meeting with specialists like art, music, PE, all those folks getting scheduled the next couple of weeks, as well as classroom teachers and others. So we're getting some feedback there. There will be public forums again as our we're getting more specific about building design, materials, what classrooms look like. MSBA did give us feedback, for instance, was they were concerned about some of the location of some of our special education classrooms. So again, where the boxes are may shift a little bit. They were concerned about the size of a couple of our special education rooms. And so, we will make adjustments based on MSBA feedback. We'll share those back with you as they get formalized before our next submission. But, I've been really pleased with the progress that the committee's made. I think the committee at our meetings asked really good questions. We've got, continue to have hopefully site visits to see other schools and involve more folks in that process. But, we are staying on timeline. I think the one thing to note in the letter, just to avoid confusion, is the letter indicates community approval for the project in December of 2022. I would say that seems unlikely at this point in time. I think it's much more looking like late winter, early spring. That's for the town to decide. I'm not a decider on that of when a potential override vote would be, but that's going to be the next set of negotiation with MSBA, is just where do we get on their board calendar, and then resultingly, when would the town put a potential override vote up for our community, as well as a vote of the Amherst Town Council. So there's lots of pieces to say. So that December date, I just don't want anyone to get fixated on that, because I think, just bluntly, I think that's unlikely. I think it'll be later than that. But really, really good news that we're moving forward. And, I think the comments that we received from MSBA continue to be very helpful and drive the project forward in really meaningful ways. Every community is concerned about the cost aspect right now. There was a discussion. I was not able to stay on the call beyond the Amherst portion, but some people were. And there was a concern about just cost in general for other projects as well. I think the other relevant piece to mention before I turn over to the school committee rep on there, if they have anything to add, was also just that we've decided, or the committee's decided, based on the subcommittee, the net zero subcommittee, to go with ground source heat pumps for energy source. Eversource is offering a pretty significant incentive for that model, as long as we hit energy efficiency of EUA, I think that's the right term, of 25 or better. So we're working with Eversource to get our reimbursement for that. So we're moving forward along that path, and be proud that I think this will, be the first building under the net zero bylaw to fully support the sustainability goals of our community. But I'll turn it over to Ben to see if there's kind of important aspects I'm missing before we open up for comments from the committee.
No, I was going to say anything I would have to add would be like kind of digging into the minutia. Yeah, there's a lot that we covered. We've met so many times since we here met the last time, but I think you hit all of the major milestones. And I might remember something later, and I'll just jump in.
Thanks. Any questions? Jennifer.
Thanks for the update. It's really great to hear. It's great that we're moving forward with the project. I thought I had heard that the ILC rooms had increased in square footage size, and I just wanted to ask about what impact that had on the. Did that impact the overall square footage, or did that with those square feet like taken from somewhere else, or like how did that shake out in the end?
Yeah, okay. I thought I was muted and I wasn't. So we are still making those adjustments. Hence the meeting with the intensive needs staff. The square footage number has not changed. So we may be, to make that work, and based on some other feedback we received from them, taking space from other areas. And I want to compliment the intensive special needs staff, because they really got that it has to be a zero-sum game. And if you're going to add some there, then you're going to have to adjust some in other places. So, where we are in process in SD and schematic design is that we'll be coming up with adjustments, but there's not a piece of adding square footage to the overall size. It's really going to be about maintaining that with some minor adjustments to different areas. Same thing's true of even, kind of restroom areas. So if we want to have a lot of gender neutral bathrooms, those tend to be single stall. There's a cost to that, and there's a space impact on that, right? It's more efficient to have larger scale, bathroom settings with multiple stalls. So we're going to continually having to revisit that and make adjustments over time. But the intent is, for adding something there, we're finding a space and adjusting it that way, because the square footage was voted not just by this group, but also by the MSBA. So that's where we are in the process. Nothing's been finalized with those, but based on their feedback, we are looking to make an adjustment to some of the specialized program areas.
Okay. Other questions? No? And maybe you said this before, but when is the next building committee meeting?
The next building committee meeting, I believe, and I'll double check this, is the 9th, I believe. They're continuing the Friday morning piece, but I believe it's the 9th.
Thanks. Okay.
And I think for people who want to see, I think part of that meeting will be looking at the meetings between now and potential votes and identifying some topics along the way. So people, I hope, will be able to get, our OPM will be able to share, here's a list of meeting dates, but also here are topics attached, because if you backwards design, which they have to do to get to a certain date, you sort of have to build some things in along the way. And that's the approach I believe our folks are taking.
Okay. If there's no other questions, thank you for that update. And now we're on, next up is future agenda planning. And so I attached the planning document, and in my own document, the live document, I've been adding things as we go. So our next meeting is September 27th. And we have the health curriculum related to LGBTQ+. This was a topic that was requested at the last spring, and we pushed it until this year. So we'll be talking about that. We added the Commandant's extended absence and transfer in policy. So discussion and vote. Superintendent goals for fiscal year 23, draft 2. And if we're ready to vote, question mark. And then elementary school building project update. Are there others? Peter.
So 2 items I'd like to get to at some point. One is talking about how we feel about returning to in-person meetings, if when. Another topic I'd like to discuss at some point is student cell phone policy at the elementary level.
Okay. Anything else? I'll just add, we had looked into having this meeting in person, which for those who have been on the committee might remember, we were meeting in the town hall, in the town room at the town hall, for a variety of reasons. And then for a variety of reasons, we were unable to get the live stream coordinated and set up, and there are still capacity restrictions in place for the public in the town room in town hall. So for those reasons, we opted to continue, at least have this meeting online. Mike?
And I just want to note that I believe at an upcoming Amherst Town Council meeting, they'll be having the discussion, which may affect capacity of us to do a similar model if they choose to be in person or not. So I'm not forecasting the outcome of that meeting, but I think the discussion will hinge, may affect some of the capacity issues that Ms. McDonald talked about, Allison, excuse me, talked about earlier.
Anything else? Okay, great. I think next up, accept gifts. Oh, and we do have a gift. Just in the interest of time, I'll read this. I move that we accept the following gifts from Marta Olver, number 996366, to support Crocker Farm at principal's discretion in the amount of $10. From Anonymous to support replacement of a refrigerator for a non-working one in the Wildwood Elementary staff room, estimated total value of $300 for a total gift cash value of $10. As well as further move that we accept the following grants from Amherst Education Foundation to support Dash robots for the technology lab at Crocker Farm, total value of $2,859.74. From Amherst Education Foundation to support project-based learning at Wildwood in the amount of $12,875. And also from Amherst Education Foundation to support Theater for All, Amherst Elementary, Middle School, and High School. Those funds are held at the region, but for a total cash grant value of $15,734.74.
Second.
Thank you. Moved by Allison, seconded by Jennifer. Any discussion? Then we'll take a roll call vote. Irv.
Aye.
Peter.
Peter, aye.
Ben.
Aye.
Jennifer.
Aye.
And Allison, aye. The motion passes unanimously. And now I will move that we adjourn.
Second.
Standing.
Moved by Allison, seconded by Jennifer. There's no discussion. We'll take a vote. Jennifer.
Aye.
Allison, aye. Ben.
Ben, aye.
Peter.
Peter Demling, aye.
Irv. It's just going around. Mike.
Irv,
No.
aye.
Irv, aye. Mike, you don't get a vote. Sorry. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.